Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 184. I'm delighted to be joined by two guests today. I'm joined by Josh Fletcher and John Noonan. Lads, how are we?
Good, thank you. Nice to be here.
Very good, mate. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it certainly is. Thank you very much for coming on. I've been looking forward to this one. We've had this in the books for a fair few weeks. I'm looking forward to dive into this. But in traditional podcast fashion, shall we go through a little bit of backgrounds and just get some ideas on who we're speaking to today, and then we can get into some of the nitty gritty. So, Josh, do you want to start off, mate? Do you want to give us a little bit of background on yourself, and then we'll also get into some stuff you're currently doing as well?
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally from the Bristol sort of area, coming from a large family, always been kind of the tearaway of the family, I suppose you'd say. And I have always wanted to travel and move around the world and just do weird and wacky things. I've had this vision of having a grandkid sat on my knee, bouncing up and down when I tell them all these different stories about places I've been and things I've done. So I've designed and created my career path to fit in line with that. And I got into kind of S&C quite late, and about 26, 27. Prior to that, I was personal training and kind of trying to learn as much as I possibly could from that, until I got to the point where I mistakenly thought that athletes were more motivated than the general public, and that was the path that I wanted to travel down. So anyway, long story short, I've worked in pro rugby, went out to India, worked with wrestling, worked as the head of the boxing program there, also worked with their football club that were there, Bangalore FC. Then I moved to Romania to work with the special forces out there with Exos. I jumped the EIS part. I did Olympic sport and Paralympic sport with EIS for 3.5 years as well. Then so after my 3.5 years in Romania, I moved to France. I now live in Lyon, and I work with Formula 3 driver through a company called Hintsa, which John also works for as well. And I did Formula 2 last year with a Russian driver. This year, my driver's Mexican. So yeah, I've got a nice mix of places, countries, and I'm certainly fulfilling one of my kind of values and goals, which is to my life, my path, and create it how I've wanted it, really. So that's me in a nutshell.
Brilliant. And John, what about yourself?
I think, like Josh, done a lot and seen a lot and managed to fit a lot into a short amount of time, really. Entry into the industry was, I guess, somewhat of a traditional route, working as a fitness instructor, PT in gyms, and kind of, not to be too derogatory, got bored of saying eat less chips and more salad and be more active, and that was all fine. But I wanted to challenge myself a bit more in the athlete space and the pro domain. So managed, after a number of internships, to get on the ladder and worked in pro football, a number of clubs, pro rugby in both codes, Winter Olympic sports, and ever since then kind of started to work privately alongside a full-time role that I had again in Premier League football. And incredibly passionate about what I do. I love what I do. And well, since being married and now having 3 children, life has somewhat taken a bit more of I'm thinking sustainable rather than intensity, if you kind of compare the two of those. And I'm thinking about, how do I continue to enjoy and thrive in what I do whilst developing and also being the husband, the father that I want to be. So I'm thinking a bit more broadly, a bit more holistically right now. And right now, like Josh was saying, I work as a performance coach through Hintsa Performance. Also have my own company in noonanperformance.com, where I support largely individuals, but some teams and corporate individuals as well to perform at their best.
Brilliant. Now I want to get into the FFF model in a second. But just on that, you just mentioned about John obviously having kids. Josh, I know you have as well, and I have too. So it's like daddy daycare on here at the moment. But for you both, do you feel that was a time, and maybe we'll get into this throughout the podcast, do you think that was a time in your career that really changed your perspective? John sort of touched on it a little bit there, but Josh, what do you think when you have kids? Do you think that's a time where maybe your perspective on things changes a little bit in terms of your career?
Yeah, I think it does. For me personally, it did not, because I'd always established that I wanted financial freedom, and in order to do that, I had to create certain things. And I've always known that I didn't always want to be working day in, day out, getting up at the after clock for the whole of my career. I knew I didn't want to do that. So I knew that there was a pathway and a model you need to create, and having a child just kind of slotted into that model that I'd already, considered for myself. And I was lucky that I got kind of involved in John's model and thought process on this quite early on. So I was fully bought in. I always knew I wanted kids, but I was fully bought in. But I can absolutely see that being a parent practitioner is, or even considering to become a parent practitioner, with the frailties and the lack of security in our industry, is huge. And that's part and parcel of why we created this model. And we created a model so that people can not only survive as a parent practitioner, but thrive. And it's actually one of the products that my company, Career Blueprint, is going to be creating in the next few months. It's how to thrive as a parent practitioner. So yeah, it's massive shifts for people.
Real. And John, can you give us a little bit of background then on where the idea came from and how that sort of came into fruition, really?
It was very much born out of challenge and from, at the time, having an experience that was definitely against the grain of what I'd planned. I was someone that for many years, I guess, and hopefully there's a lot of people that could relate to this listening, I was all in on the industry, working all the hours, committed to continual CPD, very, very comfortable with the idea that my career was my life. And in some respects, I can definitely see how that within me and in other people becomes your identity to some extent as well, which is quite a dangerous place to be, I think. When you maybe get, Josh uses the term shit canned a lot, and or you have setbacks, or you don't necessarily hit the levels and the progression in your career path that you're searching for. And all I was thinking about was having a really successful and sustainable career in performance sport, working at the highest level. And not that my wife had other ideas, but certainly when you choose to share that life with somebody else, you start thinking a bit less selfishly and a bit more about, okay, what do we want to achieve? And of course, children were on the agenda. And at the time I was working in pro rugby league, and it was a challenging environment anyway. There was no question about that. However, having our first child whilst at the club made me really reflect on the decisions that I'd made in my life to date. And if I continue to hit play on the same type of decisions, like job focused decisions versus personal and values and lifestyle focused decisions, it was only going to go one way, and that was going to be conflict for me and unhappiness. So it was really out of challenge that I fell upon, right, if I'm going to pick the next job, what will that look like? What are the three key things that I really need to tick all the boxes for me and keep me going? And that was, number one, family. I need to spend more time with the family. And I need to be in an environment that understands that and allows me to be the father and the husband that I want to become. I wanted to continue to be fulfilled in my work, and that meant to continue to develop professionally, personally, and work in environments with people and on projects that excited me. And the last thing was finance. There's no mistake that in our industry, there's a lot of conversation around being overworked, underpaid, and feeling undervalued. And by and large, if you're good, you can get to some good highs. But I was looking at the sustainability of the work in to the return financially and thought, I'm not too comfortable with that. And I think I'm worth more. And I don't think it's too much of an ego to say that. I think we should always challenge what we feel our worth is, and challenge other people in that context. And I decided to start to do that. I actually moved into a role that did allow me to see the family a bit more, had a bit more balance, but it wasn't enough. And that's when, and this isn't for everyone, and I'm not saying do this or follow the path that Josh and I have taken, but I decided to go it alone in 2019 after a few years of sat kind of on the periphery of the idea. And I've since formed a way of working in a profession that is fitting around exactly what I want. Selfishly, absolutely selfishly, and I couldn't be happier for it, if I'm honest with you. So yeah, it was very much that. But I guess where Josh comes in really is that he and I had a lot of synergies in our own experience, and felt that our problems echoed throughout the industry, and being quite passionate about looking back and trying to make better decisions that enable people to have better health, wealth, happiness, stronger relationships, based on, you know, quality love and not getting stuck in the same way that we had, or still continue to do in some respects, but have a model that allows you to make some informed decisions against a framework that is bespoke to somebody that is truly valuable.
And Josh, John mentioned about practitioners and himself, and I'm sure we've all done something similar, like early in your career, having this identity of being just stuck in that cycle of CPD and constantly trying to chase the next sort of role. And I've spoken to John about this before, but do you feel like practitioners kind of have to go through that? Or do you feel like it just needs more education of people like yourselves speaking to these younger practitioners to say, this is a lot of people get caught up in, as whatever we call it, the rat race or whatever it is. And do we need to break out of that earlier?
Yeah, I fundamentally believe we do. And I think the more experienced practitioners, the bigger the name is, the more the message is spread at like all the way down to that grassroots level, the more likely it is to happen. But the more likely that message is to resonate and get on, and people to actually get on board with it. But it's a little bit like an athlete. So you get very few of those young athletes who will truly 100% buy into the structure of not burning yourself out, not working yourself so hard and overtraining. Like, most of them will have to experience it at one point or another. The ones who don't, that's the guys who have that really, really linear progression, and they create sustainability for themselves. But they have to be educated on that. That doesn't happen by chance. And I see it as being exactly the same. One thing that John mentioned is that the reason why this actually got turned into a product that we sell is because I spoke to John a long time ago, maybe 3, 4, possibly even 5 years. And I said, what is it you do? We just have this dialogue. And he said he bases things off family fulfillment and finance. And I was like, okay. And we started speaking about it. And then I took it on board and I started using that model with myself. And then he'd already been using it with some of his mentees. And I started spreading it around some people that I was working with. And before you know it, people were feeding back saying, this is really, really good. Because people don't know how. They don't know how to make decisions which are in line with values, not logos. They don't know how to make decisions and create sustainability for themselves when they're so focused on their ego, the grass being greener, and, you know, a couple grand extra. So what we're trying to do is like really take those blinkers off. And the earlier you can take your blinkers off in your career or your life, the greater chance, like, it's almost like the higher your pyramid can go, and the broader you can go as well. You become limitless, really.
Yeah, I agree. And I've seen the products, and I said I spoke to John about it. And I think it's so crucial for young coaches to consider some of this, because we don't do it. We're like the value, even values, taking our values. If you ask a lot of coaches what their values are, I don't think they'd be able to answer the question. Or maybe they've not had time to reflect on it, or even had that question posed to them. So I think that alone is so important, isn't it, John? Like, in terms of people to reflect on.
Definitely. I mean, to your point there, ignorance is bliss until it's not, isn't it? And when, you know, if we're thinking openly and honestly about the journey that we've been through, if you asked me at 21 years of age, or before I was 25, are you making moves with the next 10 years in mind? I wasn't, because you are hamstrung, or you're acutely aware, for a better phrase, of the pressures you're under to get bums on seats in jobs, because of supply demand. It's an incredibly competitive industry. You need to be continually demonstrating your self-worth, getting experience at the coalface. And whilst you're doing that, all you're thinking about is, oh, there's an opportunity that's popped up, I'll throw my hand in there. So you're just trying to get on the ladder, a little bit like that housing market. And you probably take a few knocks along the way too, but all you're bothered about is just getting your bum on a seat. And that's absolutely fine, because that's what you should be focused on. It's applying the skills, the competencies and knowledge that you've spent so long and so much money on acquiring at university, to get in a position where you go, I've made it, I've done it. And I'm now doing what I'm passionate about. I'm doing what I told myself I was going to work for over these 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is you've done for studies. But it's relentless. And it's only until you realize that it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to follow the dogma of, getting lost in a career, rather than thinking about, does this career really serve me as a person? Does it serve my lifestyle? One of the things that Josh and I often speak about now, with the work that we're doing, is when you're working with a high-end performer and that performer has conflict, and you can see that come through in some of their mindset or the behavioral styles and behaviors that we see trackside. It's to try and help someone become a little bit more self-aware and ask them, do you really know why you do what you do in that respect, or how you do what you do in that way? Have you considered that if you're able to define what are your real values, rather than is your self-worth determined just by where you finish on the grid, or if you're on the podium or not that week, it's asking them in the long game, what is it you're about? Are you in control mentally? Do you know what you're about emotionally? And can you shift from that place? Because if you can't, you are a passenger to the outcomes. And I think for coaches, one of the key messages that perhaps, and I know Josh, you probably can add to this as well, that I wish I'd had or been encouraged to think about is, what is the end game, John? Is it just bums on seats? Is it just Premier League? Because if it is just that, when you get to that point, we hear this in many spaces, don't we? You're going to be pretty disappointed, because you're not going to be that satisfied with just that. So create an end game that's bigger than you, bigger than the opportunities that you're seeking today, but pick an end game that is sustainable, that ticks all the boxes, like Josh talks about adventure and creativity, and I talk about family fulfillment and finance, and the one and the same. It's bespoke, but make sure you're making decisions, or at least you're being challenged to make decisions that are aligned to who you are, who you want to be, and that you have a trusted team around you as well that can help you get in those sorts of positions through honest and open conversations. And the framework that we're talking about in the FFF model is one that hopefully can enable people to think a little bit more self-critically, become more aware about their own limitations personally as well as professionally, and start to acquire information or through conversations that enable you to do it better, right? So you're not worried about I have to be a passenger to the overworked, underpaid, and undervalued. That's just what this is. It should never be about accepting that, really.
There's a couple of things that I'll add to this. The first one is, I use a military term, which is left of bang. So that's if there's an explosion, there's a firefight, there's a catastrophic event, then what the military will do is they'll look at that event and say, right, what happened just before? And what happened in the build up to that? And then they will look at that and they will create what they call standard operating procedures in order to mitigate it happening again, or to reduce the impact of, or the severity of it. And I don't know a single practitioner in our industry who doesn't have a bang coming at some point. And that bang could be burnout. That bang could be getting shit canned, as I like to call it, which is getting sacked, fired, released, asked to reapply for your own job, not getting it, being strung along, you name it. It's happened to most of us. And you can get left of that bang, because that bang is coming. So if anyone's listening to this, don't be under the illusion that that bang isn't coming. It could be burnout. It could be something physical, mental, or it could just be that you're getting absolute diminishing returns on your relationships and in your job, that you don't realize that you're not offering what you were before. So it will come at some point. So getting left of bang is really, really important. So that's something that I would definitely add to what John's saying there.
Yeah, and just on that as well, like if we're going to relate it to like players or athletes, this is stuff that we do with them all the time, isn't it? In terms of looking at where they want to be and where they want to go. So as a coach or a practitioner, it seems daft that we don't.
Yeah, it's for me, there's two things that will absolutely open your unfair advantage, in my opinion. There's two things, and one of them is networking, and the other one is career periodization. But if we wanted to add a third one in there, it would be understanding yourself and what you actually want. Like, we don't spend enough time doing that. So if we talk about career periodization, we all understand what that word is, but why do we not apply those exact same principles of physical qualities? Why don't we cut out the physical qualities for practitioners and put in core competencies of the industry? And then we build out a quadrennial plan for them, the same way we would an Olympic athlete. And then we build a macro plan, the same way that we would for a team sport player. We don't do it. And that's a massive error on our part. So guess what? We're filling the gap. That's something that we're going to do. But in terms of truly understanding what's happening, when I gave the left of bang example, I did so because it's going to come to a point where something's going to happen and you want to be armed with the skills as early in your career as you possibly can. So I'll use myself as an example. I'll tell my story a little bit. So I was exactly like John was. I was head down. I was 100%. I won't say committed. I'll say obsessed to the point of I can't remember anything positive happening in my social life between the ages of 26 and 31. Now, that's not because there weren't positive things happening. It's because I was just so driven and dedicated towards what I wanted to achieve. I cast everything aside. And then the industry does what the industry does. You come across a character you don't gel with, or you're not in the right space to be able to adapt your communication styles. Something starts to go downhill, and that bang happens. And the result of that bang for me was absolute massive burnout. And I remember sitting on a beach in the off season, like absolutely distraught and just saying, I don't want my life to be like this. This isn't what I signed. I don't love this anymore. It's not what I signed up for. It's not what I want. And this isn't okay. I was physically, mentally, emotionally shot. And all I could see, despite being in this beautiful place, all I could see was work, work, work. And that's not all right. That's absolutely abnormal. So when I sat on that beach, I made some decisions that my life isn't going to be like this anymore. Within 3 weeks, I had 3 job interviews in 3 different countries. Within 4 weeks, I had 3 job offers. And within 6 weeks, I was on a plane to bloody India. So I straight up ran away. I just thought, right, I'm done with this, because I realize now, looking back, and another reason why this model resonated with me so much is because I made those decisions in line with what my values are. And my values relate to growth, they relate to adventure and challenge, and they relate to my life, my path, none of which I was doing previously. And your values can be whatever you choose them to be, but if you're not making decisions in line with your values, then you are going to have a bang. I can absolutely promise you that. There will be, all 3 of us on this call will agree, and it's just going to happen. So as soon as you can establish some values, they're like your bumpers at the bowling alley. And all I ever wanted to do was work for a rugby club on the south coast of France as the head of S&C. That's all I wanted to do. And when I sat on that beach, somehow, instead of my blinkers being here, they completely removed. I end up going to India, working with boxing, wrestling, and football. I then go to work with the Special Forces. I then move on to work in Formula 2 racing and now Formula 3. Without any of that, without taking those blinkers off, without re-engaging with my values, I would never be where I am. I'd be still chasing the next logo, the next logo, the next logo. So I opened up all this opportunity for happiness, health, and wealth. That's just my story. Everybody's different, and my values led me down that pathway. And I've never, every time I made a bad decision, I've made it because I wasn't making it in line with a really defined set of values.
What's been some early feedback from people that have been through the model, used the model, especially from younger coaches? Has there been anything that's been like any trends from younger coaches, John?
Well, I think Josh has probably got a bit more information on the younger end. I've definitely made more of a point of speaking to some like-minded individuals that have been through the stages of career that I've been through. So as Josh calls it, the thrivers and redefiners, I believe, Josh. So guys who are 25 plus, and that's part of that's because of that's the number of guys and girls around that age bracket that I've got in the mentorship right now. And they have found it enlightening, refreshing, unhinging in some respects, because it does open the Pandora's box a little bit. You know, Josh talks there about getting left with a bang, and if the bang's, it isn't when, it isn't if, it's when. And it doesn't necessarily mean you get a setback in your career, but it's just an enlightening moment when you go, I didn't really see that coming. And I didn't really figure that actually I wasn't asking the question of how is this career serving me? Because all I'm worried about really is, am I good enough? Do I have the competencies? Do I have the hard skills to deliver the success that the environment or the people around me want and need? Am I fulfilling the quota of hours on the pitch or in the gym? And it's just rinse, repeat. And before you know it, you've chewed up 5 to 10 years and maybe seen a couple of different clubs, different accents, different tracksuits, but same challenges if we're honest. and found that you've aged through the experience and you've acquired masses as a professional, but you might not have developed that much as a person. And that's not to say that, how can you not develop professionally and personally? Of course you can do both. But if we're talking about having really good emotional, social awareness, critical thinking, the ability to communicate effectively, not just set some reps here, but establishing fundamentally, what are you about? What do you want? And are you in control of that journey? Because more often than not, when you're trying to compete with bums on seats and get into a role because there's a traditional pathway that you're competing with, it's very, very, very easy to get lost in that journey. And as I said, arrive 10 years down the line and go, I'm kind of not willing to do another 10 years of this because I don't have a great social life. I'd failed relationships because I'd given, at the time, more to the job than the partner. And unsurprisingly, the relationship suffered. I looked at, one of the things that I really want to achieve down the line was to be a senior S&C coach at England Rugby. And I didn't fulfill that target because I then realized quite early on in my career, when I attended one of the annual conference days, looked around the room, and at the time, this was perhaps in 2011, could have been 10, 90% of the room were male. And of that, a large majority were single and or divorced, and thought, this is the outcome that I'm staring at. Is it? I don't know if I want that, because I do want to get married. I do want to have children. And look, there are many, many people out there making it work. Credit to you. And if you have a balance there that really fulfills you and you're excited by, and you have a family, fantastic, more power to you. But for me, at least, the terms with which I was giving my time, my value for what I was getting back in return, it didn't necessarily suit me. And I decided to look at roles and opportunities and ways of working that would give me the balance I so desired. And then I eventually went self-employed. But it all came down to establishing what my values were. Because when you understand that, you understand what your heading is. You've got to know where you are in order for you to know where you're going in the future and what you really aspire to. And if you can start to make decisions that are congruent with that heading, you're going to find a lot more health, wealth, and happiness. And you're going to be inspired for time to come. If you aren't making decisions that are congruent with a lifestyle that you want and a future that excites you, you're probably going to have some internal conflict. And so some of the critical questions that we ask individuals, and we try and ask through the model, is to encourage folks to be really open or honest, self-critical, and define what is important to you, and how do you intend to go about getting that.
I'll bolt on to that and frame it in terms of the stages of your career. So for me, and what we talk about in the model itself, is that there are 4 stages of your career. So there's a breaker, a survivor, thriver, and a redefiner. And there's different characteristics which represent each stage. So they are characteristics. It is a continuum, so it's not locked in stone for everybody. So as an example, I'll give some feedback from those guys as well. So we've had people purchase from each of those categories, and different things resonate to each group depending on where you are. So the breakers are individuals who are just trying to get their first step on the ladder. They're either interning or they're looking to intern. They're looking for that first step. They are networking furiously as best they possibly can. They're willing to move pretty much anywhere for an opportunity, for a chance. They are typically between the ages of 21 and 24, somewhere around that ballpark. They are, like I say, willing to move up or down the country. They are willing to work unpaid as well. So that's a breaker. And the typical feedback from the breakers is some really interesting stuff, actually. A couple of guys said, well, this one part of this model that's not relevant for me. And they said, that's the family. I said, well, replace the word family with, instead of thinking, they were thinking of it as children. And I said, well, replace children with your parents, your siblings, your cousins, your nieces, your nephews, your friends. Okay. All of a sudden, they've totally reframed the model and been able to then go back to it and re-engage. So that's the first group. The other guys within that, those breakers, said, I really need to start thinking about this in a bit more detail. A couple of people actually said, I'm not actually sure if this pathway is for me, based on some of the things that you guys are saying. A couple of them said, I'm even more determined now, and this model has just given me more direction to really identify and open my mind to opportunity and how to go about achieving it. So that was what the first guy said. The next group is a survivor. So a survivor, they've got that first foot on the ladder. They're on that, climbing that slippery ladder up, and they're looking for that next promotion, that next foot on the ladder, if you like. They are still willing to move around. They're still willing to work ungodly hours for probably not enough money. They are now probably looking into creating some sort of passive income, or just earn a couple extra grand here or there, probably prepared to move the length of the country to achieve that. Very much focused on the industry, very much not focused on often on their social lives, on creating and being the best person that they can be. And that group probably be around 24 to 27 would be a typical age bracket. And that group have said, we understand that this is something we really need. And some of them would say, but we have to do what we have to do in order to make our way. And I totally understand that. Yes, you do. But here's what I responded. Just be doing everything, taking your steps that you take, with the understanding that what you're doing right now is a stepping stone. It's a stepping stone for the next job and the next job and the next job. So don't give your soul to a job. Don't give your heart and soul to a job and a logo, because you're going to leave that and be forgotten. You're going to leave that and move on, but make sure you're the one that's moving upwards and onwards by making decisions which are right for you about how a job is going to serve you, rather than the other way around, because that club, that badge, that logo will just employ somebody else. So that started to get people rethinking and reframing how they were making their job decisions. So we move on to the next category now, which is your thrivers. Your thrivers are maybe 27 to, this can go on for a while, 35, 36, 37 onwards if you choose. Probably looking for a management position, wanting to take on a bit more responsibility, maybe manage a department, head up a department, challenge themselves a little bit more, starting to realize the industry is not all sunshine and puppy dogs, probably a little bit less interested in working every hour that God sends. They are, again, probably looking at a family now, or thinking about starting a family, if that's what they choose to do, or they're looking at redressing their work-life balance. They are probably becoming a bit disillusioned with some of the things that they are asked to do in terms of commitment, and getting fed up with the lack of sustainability, and a little bit more concerned about job security, and probably looking at a mortgage or have a mortgage at this point. So the fear is kind of raising up and rising with regards to finances as well. Often looking to, or have already created, another source of income as well. So those guys have said, wow, this is the push that I needed in order to either make a move, look at a move more critically, or open my mind to what I've actually got where I am, and how can I stay where I am but add another element onto what I do. So what can I kind of scale back in terms of my time commitments to not give my heart and soul to this place, focus on what is actually moving the needle, and refocus my time and attention on creating something for me, creating the life and the pathway that I want. They look at their jobs critically, they look at their jobs holistically from a 360 perspective, often getting the feedback from their friends and family as well, which is huge, because if you want scaring, then you ask your partner for feedback on what they think about you and your working scenario situation, and that will scare the life out of you. So those guys are starting to do that. Then we move on to the next phase, which is your redefiners. The redefiners are the guys that just said, you know what, I've always wanted to do this for myself. I'm fed up with the industry. I'm fed up with being treated poorly, being not paid enough. I'm fed up with the hours, and fed up with all these different things. I'm not about the logos and the badges anymore. Or I just want a little bit more autonomy, and I want to create my own path. So those guys typically around that 32, 34, 35 mark plus, and they're looking to go it alone, or at least have their side hustle, as people like to call it, raising up so that it can become their primary income at some point. Probably working very hard to do that. They are not prepared to move the length of the country for anything that isn't substantial. And they are definitely looking for more sustainability, both financially and in life in general. And the feedback from those guys is exactly as John would describe. It is, I wish I had this 10 years ago. And the message is huge and it's clear. This is a game changer, because I didn't know half of this stuff. I have not applied half of this stuff. Hence, I've got to 35, 36, 37 and realized my life isn't where I want it to be. I don't have sustainability for my kids. I've cast aside my social life and my social circle for what? An industry which chews you up and spits you out. So that's some of the realities of it. And some of those I feel personally as well. So all around it, those different phases and stages are pretty representative of everybody that we've spoken to, both prior to launching this and kind of off the back of it.
Brilliant breakdown, mate, of all the stages there. And I think everyone listening now should be really thinking about where they're at in terms of that transition. I'm sure they will be. John, in terms of if we do have any employers, any people, any decision makers that are at clubs, obviously we're talking more about football now, with roles, how could or should roles be adapted, do you think, to allow for this balance, this FFF balance?
I think it's very difficult to frame it as a how could a role or an environment be adapted to befit the balance that we're talking about. And I think invariably the balance is always in their favor, because you're a service personnel, right? And the requirement upon you is to deliver a standard of service that we require to get this team or this individual at the level that's required, because that's what we're all signed up for. You signed the contract to demonstrate that you would deliver that, and that's what's expected, and that's what's agreed. So it is difficult, I think, to change those terms. I have been in environments that have had, let's say, influencers and leaders, like really good leaders versus a manager, really good leaders that have said, what are we doing this year in terms of your personal development? Here are the areas that we feel together you could do better in your job. So how are we going to look at CPD or opportunities within your role right now to grow those elements? And equal to that, alongside that, people are also saying, talk to me about what's happening with you personally. What have you got going on? How's things at home? How's your partner? How's your kids? What are they into? They know the names of your children. They take great interest in understanding what individual they've got in front of them, and they care about the human and not just the professional, I think. And then parallel to that, there are other environments that don't do that as well, care deeply about the professional end and delivering upon expected outcomes and KPIs, but tend to negate the personal aspect of it. Unsurprisingly, they are the environments that have a high turnover, because coaches churn and burn, because the focus of that culture, that environment, is performance wins. I would like to think that there's a number of conversations now, and the narrative is moving more toward holistic well-being, holistic performance. Gosh, we're all practicing it as coaches. If you want to pull on the stigma of what you're calling yourself now, John, are you an S&C coach? Are you a performance coach? You're trying to think more broadly about what is sustainable, because you recognize that winning isn't a one-time thing. It isn't a quarterly thing. It isn't a yearly thing. If you want to do that successfully again and again and again, you have to have all things lined up, and you have to be very, very aware about where time is best spent. And for us as coaches and individuals, that is getting down to, when you're at home, is everything great with you? What's going on with you at the moment? Or simply asking, are you okay? And it's the personal relationships that I think you really look for. And there's some great examples of that. I had that at Everton, for instance, in John McKeon, fantastic leader, because he was just a great person. And there are other environments that don't quite match up to that. But it's about the person that drives the ethos, that drives the culture, and then the individuals can thrive within that. And there's no mistakes that there are peers around you that also have or look to have a good balance, and are encouraged to have side hustles, and other things on the side, rather than discourage for doing that and suggesting that, well, surely your time should be spent also on getting better in this job and giving us better output. That is the churn and burn mentality, isn't it? So I think challenging that is really important. And if you are a leader with an opportunity to grow and develop people, for me, absolutely core and front and center of that is to hopefully be developing the person and not just the professional.
Yeah, I'll just bolt on to that. You alluded to it, John. Wellness is bespoke, so it means something different to each one of us, and it means something different to you depending on where you are and your stages and phases of your career. So, for example, if you're a little bit further down the line, or you have family, you have kids, being able to drop them off and pick them up is going to be huge for you from school. Being able to feed them at nighttime, being able to see them before they go to bed, that's huge. Is there a way to alter, manipulate the working schedule so that everybody gets to do that at least a certain number of times per week? Really good conversation with Nick Grantham the other day, who spoke about trying to instill at Newcastle United, trying to instill performance coaches not having to be there on game day. Why do we need to be there? It's a 10-minute warm up. Like, somebody else can do that. Who has to be there, like a physio or something like they could do that. Why do we have to be there? But then the coaches kicked off when they said, whoa, this is our reward. We worked for this. Like, we work all week for this. We want to see the match. So he's like, all right, we'll do what you want to do then. Which then leads me to a conversation I had with Des Ryan when he was in charge of Arsenal Academy. And he said that he was very, very strict. He sounds like a great leader, but don't cross him. He was very, very strict with his staff. He said, you will work this amount of hours, and that's it. Do not work a single hour over. If you choose to, that's on you. But this is what you're contracted to. This is what my expectations are. And that's it. The door is always open. And he ensured that he created that environment. And exactly the biggest thing I think anybody could do, employer, manager, you name it, is, what does wellness mean to you? Day one. What does wellness mean to you? What are your struggles, physically, mentally, whatever? What are your struggles? Where are you weak? Let's sit down. How can I help you? Let's sit down and do a gap analysis. For a breaker, it might be, look, I'm just really focused on my career at the moment. Can you help me map out a CPD structure and plan? Yeah, okay, no problem. Let's put an hour aside this day, and then we're going to do one session per week. And he's going to go, wow, I feel valued. I feel wanted. He's helping me grow. Ticking off one of his lifetime values. If someone did that to me, I would have been tick. That's a personal value. It could be someone who's a little bit further down the line, like, I just need to get out and just breathe a little bit every so often. Okay, no worries. We'll go down to the cafe. You do your work in the afternoon on a Tuesday from the cafe, and we know where you are. I'll give you a call. Just make sure you're there, and you knock off at 5 p.m. the same as everyone else. Or it could be that guy like John who wants to put his kids to sleep instead of getting in at 10 o'clock. You know what, John? Tuesdays and Thursdays, you come in early, but you leave early so that you can put your kids to bed. And the other 2 days, we'll see if we can arrange it with the staff. So you do the morning and they do the night. Just chop things around so that you try to make everybody's life as easy as possible. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it? Because like you say, it is different for everyone. But the thing behind the structure that Des took as well is, at least you know then, don't you? Like, he's setting it out from the start and saying, these are the hours, and you know that. Whereas you're not getting caught up in that whole thing of, do I need to stay and look like I'm doing more? And that's when it becomes dangerous, isn't it?
Yeah, he was from what he described to me, and it's actually available in the Facebook community that I've got, so people can go and have a look. It's absolute gold. I'm going to try and get him back on again, actually. But he was essentially talking about creating the environment, laying out your expectations very clearly, but upholding them. Not, I wouldn't say like with an iron fist, but you uphold them. Both those ones, you should be out the door. You sure you want to be here still? All the way through to, we agreed that we were going to deliver this standard, and I'm not sure if you're delivering that in a moment. Let's talk about how we can get you back on track. So the whole spectrum.
Lads, I just wanted to wrap things up because I know we're getting close to time, but I wanted to talk about the final F, the financial side, because this is one thing that just isn't spoke about in the right way, in my opinion, because I think coaches get talked away from speaking about money, don't they? And it's not about money. I'm not doing it for the money and all the rest of it. And then we all end up at that point where we want that side hustle because we want to earn that bit more. We need to earn that bit more because we've suddenly got the mortgage and the family and all the rest of it. How do we approach this? Because I know a lot of it's going to come back to those discussions earlier on in the career, but in terms of changing perspectives, especially I'm talking early on now, but less experienced practitioners. John, what's your thoughts on that about getting coaches to talk about this side?
Early on, it's challenging, isn't it? Because the standards and bandwidths with which we operate within are largely determined already, and you're very, very aware, I think, as a young up and coming S&C who's maybe just stepped into an environment or sub 5 to 10 years of being discourteous and unprofessional to start to challenge the money or ask why it's just at that standard or that level of remuneration. I absolutely think that you should, and it should be done a lot more, and that conversation should be more open. However, I think that the industry, we're still struggling, aren't we, in the position where when a job is advertised, it's maybe 50-50 whether or not the remuneration salary is shown or not. And then, there's uproar on the social medias off the back of that. So you can't win them all from the employer end either, because you are hamstrung. You know you need to get good practitioners in and you want to pay them well, but sometimes you just physically can't. That's where maybe the additional, let's say, personal opportunities or managerial elements around helping an individual get time elsewhere or get time for themselves, like Josh was describing, maybe how you do that in that environment becomes all the more important. Because if you know you're taking a bit of a hit financially based on the exchange for time that you deliver, then you want to make sure you're at least developing in other areas. And that might be through the free CPD, or getting opportunities outside of your own environment with a partnered or a shared environment where you can go and get set of experiences to add to your boat. I think that having done it badly myself as well, when in certain positions, and there's I hate the question, what were you paid in your last role, John? And I shot myself in the foot once, and I said, I said what I said, and then said, what would you expect for this role? And I just blurted out the same or more. And so obviously when the offer letter came through, it was the same, unsurprisingly, because they are looking at their margins and their budgets, and that's fine because they're there to be business as well. I would challenge people to be a bit more prepared and a bit more willing to ask the questions about opportunities for financial growth, bonuses, etc., and opportunities to earn more in addition. And then I would also challenge them to think, if you are not being paid what you feel you're worth, number one, because self-worth is subjective, or value is a perceptional thing, right? How do you define what your value is? And if the industry is willing to pay its practitioners, like done in the UKSA survey, I think in 2016, if the majority of folks coming in who are 5 years or less qualified with an industry cert, you can expect to, I think, receive an annual salary of around £20,000. If that is what the industry is willing to pay, make your peace with it, and still go and get your experience, and still choose good environments that nurture professional people development, and then go and earn on top elsewhere, or at least have a plan for what the future might look like for you. And that's what I kind of tried to do. I didn't go into an environment without at least an idea of what they may pay. Otherwise, I wouldn't have put my hand in the mix. But like we were describing earlier, there are absolutely times when you have to get your hands dirty, and you might not be handsomely paid, but it might be a necessary evil as a stepping stone to get to a level where you go, no, listen, I'm going to be a little bit more honourable here to my own qualities, and I'm going to ask for this. If I don't get it, I might have to make a difficult decision and be a bit more choice elsewhere. Those opportunities are absolutely there, and you can engineer more money for yourself. But there's a time and a place for being a little bit tenacious with that, and there's definitely a time and a place for being strategic about how you're going to engineer that.
It's a massive one, and one thing that you mentioned, or two things you mentioned. Number one is negotiating. So you're going to need to negotiate. Every single person in the world should learn about sales. They should learn about sales and negotiating, because you're selling yourself, you're selling an idea, you're selling a product, you're selling everything. You're selling your whole life. You'll spend selling. The second thing would be, lost my train of thought then. So if sales was the first thing, you mentioned knowing your value. You've got to know your value. You also need to know, this is the second thing, to know what you spend your money on. So be wiser with your money and how to use your money to work for you. My first job was 11 grand, 11,000. I then did extra work to make that 11,000 more. But how I used that 11 grand gave me a springboard to do, my next job was 18 grand. And then it just goes up and down throughout your entire career. But understand that it's a stepping stone. Everything you do is laying a foundation brick for you to have a higher salary at some point in your career. And understand that that's what you're doing. And don't chase £1,000 extra here or there. Play a longer game by mapping out your pathway, periodizing your career, understanding that you're making decisions for the right reasons based off one of those F's that you're focusing on at that particular juncture, or take a much more rounded approach to it. And just as the background you've got behind you, put another brick in the wall and make sure that you have those foundations laid in place with solid financial education. And so you might be earning terrible money, but at least you're being smart with the money you do earn. And at least you're creating opportunities for that money to grow, or for your potential for you to increase that salary in the future. So it's that self-awareness and education for me.
Brilliant. Well,
sorry, just really, really quickly, one thing I would throw on top of that, because it's a resource that helped me time and time again, and it's been a huge part of my philosophy since reading it, was a text. I think I mentioned this everywhere I go actually at the moment, but called Rich Dad Poor Dad. You don't have to be a father.
I'm literally reading it now.
Right. Okay. So you know exactly what's going to come. You don't need to be a parent to pick this thing up. It is just challenging your consensus, experience, and knowledge around money, and how to not just manage money, but how to make money. And you know, most of us, it's drilled into us, it certainly was through me at my primitive education, of go and get the best education you can, go and get the best paid job that you can. And then that will allow you to go and buy liabilities such as a nice car, holidays, homes, etc., etc. But you're just sinking money into liabilities, so that you go, oh, I want a bit more money, a bit more surplus revenue. I'll go and get a bigger job, go and get that next best job, which is maybe only £5 grand a year more, but great, I've got more money to spend. And you just end up kind of chasing this activity of earn more and spend more.
Yeah.
One of the things that the book really promotes as a resource, and I promote it personally a lot now, is being really, really smart about where your earning potential is coming from. And they split it into quadrants, right? Typically, we're very comfortable of earning time for money, which is your employment. But if that's your only means of earning, you are at risk, because as soon as you get shit canned, Josh talks about, or there is an unforeseen circumstance, you're struggling to be able to afford and get through the problem. So trying to be a bit more forward thinking about how you're earning some money passively, if at all, through products or programs on the side that maybe you've written already for some of your team programs or athletes. Are you, if possible, thinking about investing? If you're not, you probably should. You don't need to be a mastermind, but you just need to ask around and take advice from people that have done the things that you're thinking about, and follow those examples, if not a little bit, crudely first, and then look to develop that a bit more. And then assets. Can you put your money into assets, if at all possible, as well? And just think about spreading your risk. And like Josh talked about there, you'll be amazed what you can achieve if every single pay packet you get, try to use that asset, look at it upon as an asset, and think about how you're going to spend those coins to give you the most return at the end of the year, to go, now I am richer, not necessarily financially, but definitely from a professional level. And now that's the springboard that's helped me go to X level. And that might be buying an asset that you need. It might be online programming. It might be not using your iPhone, but buying a high spec camera to do some online filming for your social media. Whatever it is, you can definitely engineer the steps, but be a master at creating wealth, and not just spending your hard-earned money.
Brilliant. Lads, have we got any final thoughts just to wrap things up? And then can you also give your personal social medias, but then also where to get the product from as well, if one of you could do that? Josh, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I suppose I close out by saying a lot of people will be defining themselves by their job at the moment, but you're more than just a performance practitioner. There is a bang coming, which will potentially lead you to burnout, potentially lead you down pathways physically, mentally, emotionally you don't want to go down. And there's a lot of coaches with 10 plus years experience who have had these bangs take place. It doesn't have to be like that. You can take control of your own pathway, and this is one of the methods you can do to achieve that. So in terms of finding out a little bit more about what I do, my company's called Career Blueprint. You can find me on Instagram, which is @Career Blueprint, Twitter @Coach Blueprint 1. Career Blueprint was taken by somebody. I still haven't found out who they are. Website is yourcareer-blueprint.com, and that's pretty much where I hang out.
Brilliant. What about you, John?
Not much more to add than what Josh is talking about, to be honest, in terms of additional stuff there. But I think more than anything, if you're someone who is at a crossroads and or thinking about, scaling your career or pivoting from where you are to try and seek brighter pastures for your future, then just reach out to us as well and have a conversation. We're more than willing to do that. And I think you learn masses, don't you, as individuals, doing that again and again and continue retracing your own steps. In terms of the work where I'm doing it is noonanperformance.com and social media handles of John Noonan Coach as well.
And where did they get the product from? Are they both on the websites, on both websites? Sorry.
Yeah.
Exactly, mate. Yeah, you can find more about it there. We're poor sellers, aren't we, Josh? Yeah, you can find more about the products on the websites as well.
Yeah.
Brilliant. There's some absolute gold in this, and I'm not just saying this because you're on, but I've seen the product, and I think it's crucial to get out to as many coaches as possible. So everyone listening, go and get it, because there's some serious good information, and if anything, it really is going to make you reflect and ask some questions on your values and where you want to go and where you are currently. So lads, keep up the great work. It was great to catch up, and thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having us, Ben.
Pleasure. Thanks, mate. Great to chat.